if you struggle with POTS, your loved one, your child struggles with POTS, or someone you know you work with struggles with POTS, they must get this episode. It's not a mystery condition. In fact, chiropractically, in a nervous system focused chiropractic understanding, it's one of the most simple, straightforward conditions we deal with in practice. Healing is entirely possible, neurologically, naturally, without drugs. Welcome to the Experience Miracles podcast, where we help parents find hope, answers, and drug-free help to overcome your child's chronic health challenges. I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be sharing my experiences as both a dad and a doctor on every episode. I can take the latest science and neurology of healing and break it down in the most simple and relatable way possible. We'll take on the toughest topics and answer your biggest questions through interviews with other amazing parents and leading experts, leaving you with practical action steps that you can take to help your child heal and thrive. It's time to expect and experience miracles. Let's get started. Okay, parents, I gotta say at the jump of this one, I'm sorry I didn't get this episode out to all of your families earlier, because this conversation around POTS is a big deal, big conversation today. It shouldn't be. It absolutely shouldn't be. Our teenagers and our young adults, POTS is something that hits teenage girls, young women, way more so than men. And we'll get into that a little bit with how the actual root cause of this disorder, this diagnosis, it's really kind of an aggregate of different challenges that just gets this name. It's a classic medical misplaced diagnosis. Like, obviously there is orthostatic, there is heart rate increases, there is anxiety. So the name that medicine gives it is accurate to some of the symptoms, but isn't that the most medical thing ever? They're just putting an acronym on the symptoms. They have no clue what the actual root cause, therefore the actual solution to help these poor folks is. And the truth is, that's the conversation we need to have. Why are so many kids struggling with this? Why are so many young adults struggling with this? Well, it's the perfect storm that we talk about all the time on the podcast into the teenage years. It can go all the way back to high stress pregnancies, birth intervention that initially cause subluxation, vagus nerve dysfunction, things I will teach you that are really connected to POTS, to the anxiety, to the fainting, to the rapid heart rate, to the digestive issues, to the, oh no, the weather's changing, the full moon, like all of the sensitivity neurologically has a root cause that for most of our patients with POTS, and we have helped so many naturally without drugs, and also without trying to just mitigate the symptoms with maybe some diet changes and increases in electrolytes. Like, it's crazy. The conventional medical approach to POTS, I mean, I can look at a lot of conditions that our kids and families are going through, and say, okay, medicine, that's the best you've got. But this one, goodness gracious, they really missed the boat. Like, they're not even in the same ocean as to trying to help these kids and these young adults with POTS. So let's get into this one. I actually don't even want this one to be so long, because it's such a quality of life destroying challenge that I just want to get to the answers. I just want to be a little more rapid pace with this one. Oh goodness, that was not a neurological pun intended to describe tachycardia to anyone. And if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that my science and my jokes and my dad brain and my farmer upbringing, they kind of all just merge together, and stuff just comes out here while I'm talking into the mic to try and serve your families with hope, answers, and help. And so let's get into it. I just want you to get the answers. I want you to get to the actual solutions that will move the needle and improve quality of life like crazy. But let's start there with diagnosis. I just want to spend a few minutes on, I think this is an important conversation within a conversation. And it's fresh off the heels of an awesome intake consult I had last night with a family whose little dude is 4 or 5 years old. And it's not POTS conversation, but it's very relative to the POTS conversation and any diagnosis for yourself or for your child or for your teen or young adult. And the question is, like, do you think we should go do the neuropsych evaluation? It was more of this child struggling with sensory spectrum-ish sort of stuff. And I'm so glad the parents asked, because in the work that we do, the diagnosis doesn't matter. We're not needing a diagnosis to create insurance codes and bill to third-party payers or to get services. And honestly, the only time in our work that a diagnosis maybe benefits a family, because it definitely doesn't come without, we'll call it side effects either. It's like anything medicine does. It may come with some positives, but it's coming with some negative. It's coming with side effects. Like that's just how everything over there works. And so when your child gets a diagnosis, there might be the initial positives like, this makes sense. I needed to know that they were sensory. I needed to know that it was spectrum. I needed to know that it was ADHD. I needed to know that it was anxiety. There's a little bit of this kind of, it makes sense to explain my child's symptoms. That's really how the business of diagnosing works. A diagnosis comes from partly, aggregating the symptoms together. And then if it's an actual strong diagnosis, then it comes with exam findings. There's got to be some actual clinical testing, blood work, whatever it may be, imaging, finding. And really, POTS doesn't have that, just like a lot of other conditions in medicine. It's really based upon symptoms only. Now, they can do blood pressure tests. They can do upright, kind of these vestibular balance sort of tests. But what do the tests do? Prove to the patient what they already know. Like that's what happens all the time when they get a diagnosis. So it's rare that the positive components of diagnosis are that helpful. Like, now I know. Parents already know. They know their child has these struggles. They know, and young adults, you already know I have POTS. These are my challenges. I didn't really need a diagnosis to, call my destroyed quality of life something. I don't need the label. I need the explanation and the answers as to why it's happening, because I get those answers and I get the explanations as to what's really causing these symptoms. Then I can address the root cause. I can have natural, drug-free, effective solutions, and I can get to the other side of this. So that's where we go with this podcast, right? We always go beyond the symptoms. We always go beyond the diagnosis. And I'll just finish my little rant about whether a diagnosis is important or not. I think most of the time it's more of a detriment than a positive, because what medicine is really based upon, it's a close akin to what's called identity politics, right? It's like, I need to have this diagnosis because now I can own it. And what medicine, the business of medicine really succeeds in is getting patients to feel like victims, to getting them to feel like, this is just genetic, it's bad luck, it's hardwired into your DNA, your system was designed broken, and this is what you get. This is your, hand of cards. You were dealt. There's nothing you can do. Here's your medications. And the medications for POTS are just so ineffective and riddled with side effects. But it's really important in the way that their flow chart works, that somebody gets a diagnosis, they really want to fear them, scare them into it and say, this is yours. You have it forever. Here's your medication to hopefully kind of sort of feel better, but not ever address the root cause. Guys, that happens in POTS. So overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to explain why this aggregate, this box of symptoms with dizziness, rapid heartbeat, chronic fatigue, and near constant, so easily triggered anxiety, especially when you shift positions, stand up, move rapidly, especially, it's not just positional in, kind of in coordination and sensitivity challenges, but also weather. How come when I'm sick, this anxiety is triggered? How come when the weather changes, my anxiety is triggered? So what kids, families, young adults with POTS know is that they're just walking on eggshells all the time. The other challenge they face is this condition's kind of a mystery. Again, you go to conventional medicine and you get what we already talked about. They literally still see the nervous system. And I actually don't even want to go too far down. I said it was going to be brief. They still see the nervous system. I'm on a podcast, but I just put my hands on my face like, They still consider neurological communication to be like physiological, sodium ion channels and all this sort of stuff. So that's actually still what we learn in chiropractic school too in undergrad. The nervous system is so much more advanced than the movement of molecules. That doesn't explain the speed with which the nervous system operates. And so what's really behind the fast heart rate and all of these symptoms and challenges is nervous system dysregulation, vagus nerve dysfunction, and dysautonomia. Let me say those again. And I'll add a fourth, subluxation. The terms, if you struggle with POTS, your loved one, your child struggles with POTS, or someone you work with struggles with POTS, they must get this episode. Share the ever-living heck out of this. It breaks my heart that so many young adults are trying to be in the prime of their life, and teenagers are trying to live their life, school and sports and social and friends, and they should be the healthiest neurologically. They should be so adaptable. They shouldn't be exhausted. Being exhausted, that comes later, when you have kids. And if you have POTS, you have dysautonomia, nervous system dysregulation, vagus nerve dysfunction, and subluxation. And guess what? It'll actually really mess with fertility. So the fact that this really triggers challenges primarily in females, it's actually a very close neurophysiological cousin of a condition, or again, root cause that will mess with fertility challenges as well. Because most of the patients, I can't think of one POTS patient I've had who their menstrual cycle hasn't really been affected negatively as well by these things, that if you have POTS or know someone does, they need to know everything about nervous system dysregulation, dysautonomia, vagus nerve dysfunction, and subluxation. That's the conversation we're going to have here today, okay? So now when medicine gets a little bit into, when WebMD and so forth get, if you've got this, you've been online looking at this, and it starts to make sense. They get a little bit down the road where they talk about it's a disorder of the autonomic nervous system. Now, what could have originally triggered this? A lot of times it's a viral infection or it's a certain stressful event in life. And so often what the system will do, and naturally we kind of do this as patients too, we'll pin the tail on the donkey and go, oh, it was when I got the flu. Ever since then, I've been dealing with POTS. It was when I had that really stressful final exam or that really stressful breakup. That's when I got POTS. That's just the straw that broke the nervous system's vagus nerve's metaphoric back, which is kind of funny because the vagus nerve and the central nervous system, the back, the spine, are what houses all this. So the access to get this better and improve POTS massively, postural, is spinal, neurospinal. So I'll let that pun live today, okay? Analogy, metaphor, pun, I really don't know what the difference all those are. I kind of just use them all in aggregate, kind of like POTS is an aggregate of symptoms. There we go. There's another one. So truth is, it is a disorder of the autonomic nervous system. It does leave, which is called dysautonomia, that's the actual term for that, which then leaves the immune system, the physical system, so posture and movement, so up, down, moving around, the gut. It leaves everything hypersensitive because the job of the autonomic nervous system, especially the vagus nerve, definitely the most important sensory, modulating, regulating, balance, restoring nerve within the autonomics. When those are dysfunctional, the vagus nerve is in charge of our balance, the vagus and vestibular function. So really organizing things, sensory, neuromuscular, what's called the sensory motor parts of this in moving our body. So the positional sensitivity is a vagus nerve subluxation based problem. So that's the dizziness. That's those, kind of issues with standing up and sitting down. What about the brain fog? Well, the vagus nerve really connects to the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus. When instead there's subluxation, dysautonomia, nervous system dysregulation, there's something called sympathetic dominance. And what that does is it goes up into our brain and it overstimulates the amygdala. That's where anxiety lives. It shuts down the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. That's where decision-making, organization, and emotional, social regulation and cognition come from. So the brain fog comes from this sympathetic dominance, subluxation, dysautonomia. The vagus nerve also goes down. So if you think of kind of like directional, so the vagus nerve is in the brainstem. Subluxation, we're going to talk about text neck. We're going to talk about everything with this. POTS lives in the neck. POTS lives in the brainstem, the cervical spine, and then what's called the cervical thoracic and upper thoracic, because that's the journey that the vagus nerve stimulation and activation is the answer to getting to the other side of POTS. So the vagus nerve goes north in farmer speak. That means up, okay? And it goes to the brain, and that's where a lot of the vestibular, so inner ear, oculomotor, so that's our eyes and our position sense and upright reflex is there. And then it goes and it messes with things like the balance between the amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex. So vagus nerve dysfunction, subluxation, these things we're talking about today that actually are the root cause of POTS. It's not a mystery condition. It's a neurological one. The nervous system can just be intricate and complicated. So my job, God put me on here on earth to explain it more simple and straightforward. Using the nerd words, yes, but then bringing simple analogies, metaphors, examples to bring it to life. So this vagus nerve dysfunction, which comes from what's called subluxation, misalignment, fixation, tension in the neck and shoulders. Every single POTS kiddo we have, every single young adult we have, they've also dealt with chronic tension headaches and pain in their traps between the shoulder blades. Like this is a physical neurobiomechanical problem that then becomes its own perfect storm and vicious cycle. So the vagus nerve dysfunction goes north, messes with the brain fog, anxiety, dizziness, all those sort of things. Then it goes south because the vagus nerve also goes down into the gut. And that's why the digestive issues come along with that. So all of this ties together. We know that anxiety and brain-based issues are connected to the gut. There's a gut-brain connection. Guess what that is? We talk about it every episode on this sucker. That's the actual vagus nerve and the autonomic nervous system. So that's why it's so misdiagnosed, because the root cause is not the symptoms. The root cause is the autonomic vagal nerve dysfunction. And guess what symptoms autonomic nervous system dysfunction can cause? A whole laundry list. Because what does the autonomic nervous system control? Everything under the sun. So we've already talked about, I'm going to be brief. Mainstream medicine says, we don't really know. Why don't you increase your salt and fluid intake? Slow down a little bit. Like you got to, what's that movie with the sloth or whatever? I can't think of it now. Famous kid movie a couple years ago. Move through life slow. And then if that doesn't work, here's some beta blockers, some steroids, and some other drugs to regulate blood pressure. Really? A teenager trying to slow down life? A teenager trying to have a perfect diet and constant hydration with element and electrolytes? Love it. By the way, go for it. That's the goal. I'm trying with my kid. I'm really working with my teenagers. Hey, you know what would help you sleep better? Not raising canes. Okay, let's go with that. Let's start there. Guess what would help you sleep better? Not Trader Joe's, which pretends, this is like the second or third time I've thrown some shade at Trader Joe's, but Trader Joe's is healthy, right? Ugh, look at the ingredients, So anyways, it's a teen. They actually should be more adaptable. I could go on here all day and be like, we should all eat perfect, never have raising canes, never do whatever. Come on. When you're a teenager, you should be the most resilient, adaptable. You got metabolism. You got adaptability. Your nervous system should be bussin', which again is a teen term I use all the time to tick off my teens. I have 3 of them now. My youngest just turned 13 a couple days ago. All right. So the medical reports or treatments on this. No. Functional medicine. Love it. Getting deeper. Let's work on the diet. Let's work on kind of like rebuilding your physical activity. So they will say, okay, this is a postural physical issue. Let's work on that. Stress management, deep breathing, Wim Hof, yoga. They'll get in there. They'll find out if there's gut issues, microbiome disrupted, heavy metals, nutritional imbalances, inflammation. They'll tackle that. Love it. Functional medicine approach, way better than traditional medicine. Still doesn't get to the vagus nerve dysfunction. Still doesn't get to the neck. Still doesn't get to subluxation. So the real root cause, we've talked about it this whole time. Let me round third base. Dysautonomia. That is sympathetic dominance. And then the other side of the coin, so it's a 2-part problem. It's one thing with 2 negative sides. Too much sympathetic fight or flight. That's the anxiety. That's the tachycardia. Too little parasympathetic. What's the middleman to balance out the nervous system? The vagus nerve. And so when the vagus nerve is dysfunctional, and I'm going to have the team link the episodes where we dive deep into vagus nerve dysfunction and the articles where we dive deep into vagus nerve stimulation and nervous system regulation. So I want to keep this one shorter than most and really attack the problem. And then I want you to know, I'm going to get into the solutions here. I'm running third base. And I want you to know that if you need more, you want to have it more explained, the vagus nerve, the dysfunction, and how to stimulate the vagus nerve and regulate your nervous system, I'll have the team put those articles and those episodes in the show notes. So consider getting the answers to POTS. I want it to kind of be a little bit of series of information. If this is the first podcast you're finding because someone sent it to you and you've been struggling with POTS, this is everything. This has got what you need. But I want you to really hit the show notes and check out some of those other articles and resources. And then most importantly, we have got to get you adjusted. Like if I'm a fan of chiropractic for other sorts of challenges, this one is just literally lock and match. Like this is a chiropractic problem. This is a subluxation problem. So what triggers that subluxation, that dysautonomia and vagus nerve dysfunction in the cervical spine, in the brainstem, and what's called the upper thoracic or cervical thoracic? Usually we can actually go all the way back. And the majority of our POTS patients, even if they're 17, 19, 23, we still go back and we ask about their infant and birth case history. Most POTS patients were C-section, induction, vacuum extraction, or forceps, okay? Their neck, therefore vagus nerve and nervous system, was originally injured many years back. And what we dig into their case history, most of our POTS patients were colicky, had chronic ear infections, croup, RSV, asthma, allergies, held onto a cold forever. And then a lot of them, by the time they're teenage years, they're not only dealing with the anxiety, they have sleep challenges, and they actually often complain, which really brings this into sight here. They complain about physical tension at the base of their skull, so that's suboccipital, tension headaches, cervical headaches, so neck pain, and then most of our patients you can even see the stress on their traps. Like I know we're on a podcast, but if you just look at young adults, you just look at people who their shoulders are stuck in their ears, and you can just see all this tension in their traps, that will trigger POTS. Now that's if you look at them from the front to the back. You can see those traps are really, really pent up. Our shoulders are supposed to be relaxed. There's supposed to be a downward slope from our traps to our shoulders. And these are the sort of folks that are just living pent up, unless they've been living with it for a long time and it's been brewing for a long time. Then you can really find the subluxation, postural distortion, root cause, neurobiomechanical problem by looking at these folks and these kids and these young adults from the side. And you will see what's called forward head posture, poor posture, text neck, tech neck. We call these things. And that's a big deal with it. What is happening is young adults today have spent way more time on a phone, on an iPad, and sitting looking down, okay? And so what happens is their posture collapses. They've got old people posture at 17. Now you're like, oh, that's just a physical issue. Stand up straight. Yeah, you probably have tried that. Probably told them. They probably tried that, right? But what happens is that subluxation, that postural distortion, as that head and neck hang forward, now all the nerves and all the muscles, which is right where the vagus nerve makes its way through the cervical spine and into the thoracics. If you imagine taking, this is how I teach it to patients. If you took, and it's going to explain the brain fog, it's going to explain the fatigue, it's going to explain the headaches, and then that aggregates into the tachycardia, the anxiety, and that as well. If you were to take a bowling ball, I know it's goofy, it's very kind of like chiropractic, neuromusculoskeletal, but it'll really give you the answers as to how important getting adjusted. And then what we do with these patients is we really work on postural restoration. So we'll really work on PT sort of stuff, and we'll work in harmony with our PT crew to really help POTS patients. And it's really cut and dry. It's not complicated, okay? You don't need to go become a fitness MBA. It's really simple. But the way you can think of this, I know we're on a podcast, so you can't see my hands. If you end up watching these on YouTube, you kind of get to see me charade some of this out. But if you were to take a stick, hold it in your fist, hold it in your hand, and that stick goes straight up and down, and then you were to glue a bowling ball on top of it. So the bowling ball is 8 pounds, 10 pounds, 12 pounds. It's about the kind of weight of our head. And if you hold that stick straight up and down and the bowling ball is perfectly balanced on that stick or on that brace, you can hold it there for a long time against gravity, because gravity is centered. Gravity is stabilized. The moment you were to just tip your fist forward, let that stick bend forward, and the bowling ball gets gravitational momentum. Okay, I love neurology. I love physics. I'll try not to be too nerdy here with my terms. And that bowling ball goes forward even just an inch. The amount of pressure it places on the muscles of your wrist and forearm to now hold that bowling ball just 1 inch ahead. Now try 2. Now try 3. To hold that up literally increases the neuromuscular energy expenditure, that's the nerd terms, of the cervical and thoracic spine, and it will create exhaustion, especially if it's been this way since they were 10 and 12 and 14. So that's why POTS kicks in the teen years, because neurologically they become dysregulated and exhausted, and physically their posture becomes exhausted, and that puts tension on the nervous system. And rounding third base for real, we can find this. So what we do with our patients is we run our insight scans. To really get to the root cause of POTS, you have got to get what are called insight scans. I'll put that article in the show notes again. It's a neurothermal. That's going to show chaos. A POTS patient like Tommy, when you go look at the article, you'll see Tommy's story. Tommy's a rock star. Tommy's going to chiropractic school. Tommy came to us for an intensive. She was a horse rider. She was a busy student. So guess what? Her nervous system got sympathetic dominant, dysregulated, riding horse, being athletic, being a teen in the time she out. Her posture fell apart. Her neck fell forward, and she got an intensive care. We adjusted her twice a day, but it all started with the insight scans. Her thermal scans were a mess, because that shows the inflammation and the dysregulation within like the adrenals and the cortex and the core. EMG, that's going to measure the neuromuscular distortion. Very classic POTS patterns. I can look at an EMG, and if somebody said, oh, that's a 17-year-old or a 23-year-old female, I would be able to tell you without even looking at case history if they're struggling with anxiety, tachycardia, and POTS-like syndromes, okay? And then HRV, especially heart rate variability, is the key. You have to manage POTS. And I don't love the word manage, but you have to care for POTS with HRV as the lead. This is not a blood work disorder. This is not a cardiac disorder. This is not a genetic disorder. This is a neurological disorder. So the thermal and EMG scans are essential, and the HRV, heart rate variability. You've got, if you have POTS or your loved one has POTS, or you have got to get them into a PX office. I'm being more pushy than probably any episode yet, because it's just unfair that kids struggle with this stuff. I've got 3 daughters. They're going to be at this age, and I'm not letting this get a hold of them, okay? So you got to get HRV, you got to get scans, you got to get adjusted. So the adjustments do the job. They restore, they release the subluxated sympathetic dominant tension, they stimulate the vagus nerve, and they get the nervous system moving in the right direction. Now, for POTS patients, we really got to do movement and postural correction. So we use a special kind of adjusting. We use what are called these kind of mirror image neurotonal adjustments. Like, there's a very special protocol that PX docs we use for POTS. It's really important to adjust this way and then restore, rebuild through some movement-based exercises and things that can just be done at home. You don't have to do a ton of things here. And then, yes, of course, the hydration, the electrolytes, the nutrition. But most of our patients have already tried that by the time they come to us. So it's really about the adjustments and the postural neuromuscular rehab, and that does the job. In closing, guys, it's not a mystery condition. In fact, chiropractically, in a nervous system focused chiropractic understanding, it's one of the most simple, straightforward conditions we deal with in practice. The results we have, oh my goodness. Look, conventional medicine, medication saves lives when used appropriately. Second, I'm the biggest fan of functional integrated, but this isn't a gut issue all by itself. I mean, that might be secondary, tertiary. Functional medicine can do a lot of good, but without chiropractic, it's going to be extremely limited. I take care of a ton of case histories of POTS where they've done everything. They're on every diet, supplement, detox, and that. But nobody's addressed the subluxation, nervous system dysregulation, dysautonomia, and vagus nerve dysfunction yet. Those are 4 basically synonymous terms that are only corrected and cared for fully and effectively through neurologically focused chiropractic care. Got to get the scans. Got to get adjusted, got to get the postural correction in the right technique. And here's the last thing, the PS extra time you need to hear. It won't be overnight. Healing with chiropractic for these challenges. Because again, we're not treating, we're not curing, we're getting to the root cause. For most of our patients, if they're teenagers and young adults, that's kind of when POTS really strikes. This has been brewing often for 2 decades. So they will have incredible quality of life improvements early in care. But I want everybody to know it'll be a bit of a roller coaster, okay? They'll get better, then there'll be there's just up and down, okay? This is a condition that really wreaks havoc on the nervous system. And we find through our intensives, through our protocols, depends on the patient, what kind of care plan they get, whether they need an intensive or not. Not all POTS patients do, but if you've really been struggling with it, you may. And you can reach out to us and ask about intensives if you need to. But it will take many months to get all the way to the other side. Stay consistent, even in the places that might feel like regression or they might feel like a stuck point. They're just part of the healing process. We've got a few episodes on what's called the neurodetox and what's really happening around plateaus and what seem like regressions. I'm adding that here in closing remarks with POTS, because when you go to start, get adjusted and get neurologically focused care, and then you back it up with nutrition and hydration and supplementation and all the things that are really, really effective to do this. Tommy had already done all that. It was the chiropractic that was missing. Just know that a lot of incredible changes will happen really early, but the full, complete healing and recovery is very likely going to take months and months and months, and it might not be the most linear, most smooth, kind of step-by-step process. It might be a little 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 1 to the side. Just know that healing is entirely possible, neurologically, naturally, without drugs. And it'll happen fast and slow at the same time. And I pray and I hope so much that this episode gave you the answers, because I should have done this one months ago, because the conventional medical answers for POTS, bleh, bleh. And even in functional, it's not really inflammation. It's really neurobiomechanical in a major way. If there's one that's really black and white chiropractic and movement-based stuff, it's this one. That's where we live. That's where you'll get results. That's where you'll get relief. If you're not already under PX Docs care, hit the directory, pxdocs.com, put in your zip, put in your city, put in your state, fill out the form, get scheduled with the PX Docs office, and please, will you help us find as many people and kids struggling with POTS as possible? If there's an episode to share, please share this one. And if you're listening and you haven't yet officially subscribed, like when you're on there with Spotify or Apple iTunes, hit the little down arrow, download each episode. It really helps us. You can listen to it without downloading, but if I get granular with my request at the end for all you hope dealers who help us get, helping us on this mission and this movement, download every single one of them. And if you haven't left a review yet, could I have 3 minutes of your time, you rockstar moms, dads, chiros, other professionals, patients, please leave a review for the podcast. That helps us reach more. And we have a dream and a vision and a calling from above to literally reach millions. We're not going to stop until we transform the lives of millions of families and kids and patients, and we reverse this perfect storm, and the future generations of kids have more health, not chronic illness, than they do today by a large margin. So every time you share this, download this, leave a review, send it out on the mom chats, put it up on those Facebook groups. It helps us really go after that mission. And I love you and I appreciate you. Thank you. See you on the next one.